The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. 18 of the 25 districts in Sri Lanka are affected by the human-elephant conflict. Last year saw the highest number of human deaths and elephant deaths being reported. Now, several initiatives have been taken by successive governments to find solutions to the human-elephant conflict. Let's discuss what the ground realities are today. I am pleased to welcome to the studio environmentalist Dr. Prithiviraj Fernando. Good evening and welcome back to the show.
Good evening. Thank you, Sonali.
Dr. Prithiviraj, we know that several initiatives have been taken by successive governments. We keep having these conversations year after year, but the numbers keep rising. And this is one of the crucial issues faced by much of Sri Lanka. Speak to us about what Sri Lanka has done to mitigate the human-elephant conflict. What has the approach been? And how successful have we been?
So if we start at the beginning, why we have conflict with elephants is that elephants are greatly attracted to practically all the food crops that we cultivate.
Sure.
So if we grow food crops in areas with elephants, they're going to come and try to eat it. So of course, if you're a farmer and you're cultivating crops, you don't want the elephant to come and eat it. So then they try to prevent that, and this is where the conflict begins. So the human-elephant conflict, as we refer to that, probably goes back to whenever we started cultivating where there were elephants, so probably goes back a few thousand years. But in the recent past, it has been escalating pretty dramatically, I would say. Now, particularly over the past 60, 70 years, there has been a lot of massive effort to find a solution to this, or at least to mitigate it. The basis of this kind of goes back to a committee appointed by the government in 1959,
Okay.
which recommended that elephants be limited to certain protected areas,
Right.
which should be connected with corridors. So this is kind of the blueprint that we have been following for the past 60 plus years. It's a very sort of idealistic, simple, maybe simplistic
Okay.
kind of solution.
Right.
The idea being that if we can put all the elephants in protected areas where there are no people, then elephants can live happily thereafter forever without any problem from people. And outside the protected areas, the people can do whatever development work, whatever cultivation they do without any issue from elephants. So if we look at the areas without people today, that amounts to 18% of the country. We've done a survey and we published the information. So this was based on a 25 square kilometer grid where we went to each grid and looked whether there were people, and we did a questionnaire survey. So 18% of the country, there are no resident people. So these are basically mainly the Wildlife Department and Forest Department protected areas, which means 82% of the country, there are resident people. Now, if our 60 years of effort was successful, number one, we won't have a human-elephant conflict today, and the elephants would be in that 18%. So what we have been trying for the past 60 plus years is to put all the elephants in this 18% of the country. Now, when we look at where the elephants are, currently there are elephants in 62% of Sri Lanka, more than half the country.
Wow. Okay.
And so 18%, there are no resident people. There's no conflict there. But the rest of it, 44% of the country, there are resident people and there are elephants. So practically half the country, this is a big issue. So now this is after more than 60 years of trying to limit elephants to the protected areas. So basically, if you look at the elephant range, the 18%, amounts to 30% of elephant range. So 70% of elephant range, there are resident people and there's conflict. So this is why Sri Lanka, unfortunately, currently has the highest level of human-elephant conflict in the whole world.
What have we done to mitigate this?
Yes, so the main approach, as it were, was to put the elephants into these protected areas. So for that, we have undertaken all kinds of elephant drives. There are daily drives which chase elephants. There are middle-scale drives where we try to put them into some area. There are large-scale drives which might take more than a year to push these elephants into protected areas. If there is an elephant, a particular elephant, that is causing a lot of problem, we capture it with anesthetizing it, darting it with various drugs. Then you put it in a truck and take it to a faraway protected area and release it. So we call that translocation.
Okay.
Then we have been putting up electric fences on the boundaries of these protected areas to keep the elephants there. I would say these are the three main activities that have been undertaken to mitigate the human-elephant conflict. And then, because even if we were doing all these things, the conflict seems to continue to increase. So we have now, over the past years, decades in fact, we have resorted to providing farmers with what are called elephant thunders or alivedi, which are massive firecrackers which the farmer is supposed to confront the elephants, throw at the elephant and chase the elephant away.
Dr. Prithiviraj, isn't this a really unsustainable way of going about it?
Absolutely. And I mean, so if these things were effective, then we should see a decrease in conflict.
Yeah.
If at least it should not increase. But if you look at things like the number of elephant deaths, number of human deaths, the loss to the economy, the damage to farmers, the social issues, these things continue to increase, escalate rapidly. So clearly, there's something wrong here.
Dr. Prithiviraj, can you also take us through the actions of the relevant officials, the ministries that have been set up to curb this issue of the human-elephant conflict?
Right. So in Sri Lanka, and actually in other range countries also, in many of the other range countries, human-elephant conflict mitigation has been looked upon as pretty much the sole responsibility of the conservation sector. However, it's not the conservation sector that is creating this problem. It's not elephants were in all these areas. We go and settle there, we start cultivating, and then we have a problem. So I think there is something basically wrong here. Because people are doing something that is creating a problem. The conservation, the wildlife department didn't bring elephants from India and put them here and cause a problem. They were always here, elephants were always here. So, but so part of it is because of unplanned development, mainly encroachment. So when people go and settle in an area with elephants and they start cultivating, then they have problems. But it is not limited to unplanned or illegal settlement, also planned settlements. When we open up large areas, we have invested huge amounts of funds over the years, decades, in irrigated agriculture. So practically all these areas that were developed into irrigated paddy fields mainly and other crops are elephant habitat. So we invest a huge amount of money, clear the forest and turn them into paddy fields. But if the elephants remain there, then the elephants are going to come and eat the paddy that we are growing. So again, you are creating a problem. So the tradition has been the development agencies and the people do the development. That creates a problem. Then they say the wildlife department needs to solve this problem. But this is not something that the wildlife department alone can even begin to address, because this is currently a problem that is in half the country. So it's 18 of the 25 districts. So there are millions of people who are faced with this issue. The Wildlife Conservation Department really is supposed to look after the elephants.
Wow.
If you look at the government sector, we have, I think, something more than 1.4 million government officers. And if you look at from that, what percentage is actually in the wildlife department, forest department, and such agencies, it's, I would say, probably less than 1 or 2%. The 90-something% of the government officers, their responsibility is the welfare and development of the people. Now, this is a problem that people have.
Yeah.
So shouldn't they be doing something about this issue? Shouldn't the people who are faced with this issue do something about it to solve this problem? So this is, I think, the only way we can change this issue and bring some resolution to this increasing human-elephant conflict.
Speaking about development, we as Sri Lankans are only too familiar with short-sighted developmental initiatives that don't take into consideration environmental implications. And belatedly, we have to file cases and all of that. How does that impact this issue? How severely does it?
So you're very right. So it's basically development that is causing this issue. So in that case, we need to have mitigation measures incorporated in the development plan. So that's a big change that we need to make, and that has been happening over the years to some extent in the recent past. So for example, the current couple of current irrigation development schemes, the Upper Alhara Canal project and the Northwest Canal project, mitigating the human-elephant conflict is also part of the project plan.
Okay.
So if we continue in that trend, we can begin to address this issue. But we also need to change how we try to address this issue, because for more than 60 years, we have tried to put elephants into the parks and keep them there. That has clearly not worked. So if you only do what you always did in the past, you will only get what you always got in the past. So unless we change, and there are things that you can do which are effective. For example, the problem we have is an elephant comes into the village and maybe raids the home gardens. People in Sri Lanka generally store the harvested paddy in their houses. So the elephant will break the house to get at the stored paddy. In the process, it might injure somebody, it might kill somebody. It causes damage to the property. Or else you have a paddy field and the elephants come and raid the paddy field or other crops. So if that is our problem, if I have a problem like that, I could put up a fence, an electric fence, around my property or around my village or around my crop field and prevent the elephants from coming in. So that has been tried, tested, and has proven very successful.
Okay.
If you look at what we have been doing, we try to confront the elephants and chase them away. So we get into a fight with the elephant. But the more you fight with elephants, the more elephants will fight with us.
Right.
So if we act aggressively towards elephants, elephants become more aggressive towards people. So this becomes then sort of an arms race and increasing conflict, and ultimately people and elephants die.
All right.
So if we can break that cycle and go in for community-based methods, I think we can effectively manage this issue.
All right. After this short commercial break, we'll be discussing lasting solutions to the human-elephant conflict. Stay with us.
The People's Platform.
The Bhagavad Gita is a scripture that is scientific and universal, which means it's meant for all humans across the globe.
In-person Bhagavad Gita lecture by Sunandaji on the 2nd to the 6th of March 2024 from 6:45 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Buddhist Cultural Center near Tomula Junction, Colombo 5. Registration and details vedantacolombo.org or contact 076-279-6113. Media sponsors TV1, Sirasa TV, Shakti TV and News First. TV1. TV for life.
Sri Lanka Navy joined Operation Prosperity Guardian in Red Sea, says US envoy. Indian Energy Secretary in Sri Lanka for talks on electricity project. Will Sri Lanka be paying 200 times more for electricity from Adani's wind power plant? SLT, Lanka Hospital's share transfer on hold. Shootout in Suryavava, wanted criminal gunned down. CCD police inspector flees, citing death threats.
TV1. TV for life.
The People's Platform.
Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Dr. Prithiviraj Fernando, environmentalist. Dr. Prithiviraj, at the beginning of the conversation, you said that in 1959 there was a committee to find solutions to the human-elephant conflict. In fact, you chaired a committee that was appointed in 2020. What happened to the findings and recommendations?
Nothing. The plan was prepared in 2020.
Okay.
I chaired the committee, but it was composed of all the relevant government agencies, the GAs, the district secretaries, then a number of other scientists. So we all got together, we worked very hard and prepared this national action plan.
Right.
And then it was shared. So for 2 years, nothing happened.
Right.
But actually last year, the current government appointed another committee, which is chaired by Dr. Sumit Pilapitiya,
Okay.
to facilitate the implementation. However, the idea was that this national action plan will be implemented or facilitated implementation by a task force, which
Sure.
would have a much bigger say in how it is done and what is done.
Yeah.
And also, it required a budget, so none of that was done. So this current committee is entirely voluntary. I'm also a member of that. So, but we have been able to make some progress.
Okay.
So, for example, I think one of the landmark changes that has happened is that in the past year, the Department of Agrarian Development, former Govijana Seva department, they came forward and they agreed to implement what are known as community-based paddy field, seasonal paddy field fences, wherever there is a conflict, a human-elephant conflict in Sri Lanka. So that plan is now going ahead. And the problem is, if you take a community-based approach to mitigating human-elephant conflict, particularly based on electric fences, you need to put in a lot of fences.
Okay.
And this is going to cost quite a bit of money. Now, if you look at it, if you try to do this from a conservation perspective, you cannot even begin to you can't even begin this process, because conservation is good for conversation. Around the world, we talk a lot about conservation, but if you look at the actual funding for conservation, it's peanuts. But in this case, it doesn't have to be that way, because this is a problem that people have. all the funding that we have in the national budget, the billions of rupees or dollars or whatever, is for people's benefit. So if you look at this as a people's problem, the funding that is required is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket.
Right.
So this is what we have been advocating, and there have been some buy-in from the government and the government departments to this. So the Department of Agri and Development is now going to implement these paddy field electric fences. So we are currently training their officials in implementing this program. Because this is, again, when you say implementing, they are not going to go and put up fences around paddy fields,
Right.
not at all. It requires some technical know-how. They will impart that to the farmers. And because electric fences are expensive, the government will also have to channel funds through them to the farmers. So this is the way forward, I think, that we can actually mitigate this conflict. In the same manner, we are trying to come up with a plan to implement, to protect villagers.
Right.
So the paddy field fences are seasonal because paddy is cultivated maybe once or twice a year, 3.5 months of the year. So the farmers put up a fence when they cultivate. Once they harvest, they take it, remove it, take it back home. Villages are permanent, so we have to have permanent fences to protect the villages. So to get that going has not been, we have not been very successful in making inroads there. We have been talking to the district secretaries about doing this, but we haven't had that much buy-in from them. Currently, we are talking to the Mahaveli Authority, and they seem to be more interested. So we are hopefully we will be able to proceed in this direction in the future, with hopefully with the district secretaries and people like the Mahaveli Authority.
I feel like because it is the most vulnerable communities that are directly impacted by this issue, none of the decision makers actually care, because we don't really value human life because it's so dispensable. So there's an issue there. How do we overcome that?
Well, I guess policymakers and decision makers and officials may not value human life, but they value the vote. So, I mean, this is a problem that a very large segment of our country, people in our country face. And it's not just the economic loss, not just the physical loss. If you are in a house and you don't know at what time in the night elephant might come and break the house, if you have stored paddy in the house, an elephant can easily knock down a wattle and daub mud hut or even a brick house. So if you have to sleep every single day thinking whether elephant will come and now break the house, you hear throughout the night firecrackers going around all around, and you know the elephants are around. You hear a sound in the garden, it might be the elephant coming and eating your banana plant. You can't, a lot of the houses still have outhouses in the night. If you want to, you might have to go out to the outhouse. You are scared to step out of the house. If there's an elephant, you might lose your life. It might be your daughter, it might be your son, it might be your wife, it might be yourself. So I think this also imposes a very large social cost. So this is something I think we need to realize. There is economic loss, there is a social cost, and there is a way out of this. So I think we need to, I mean, clearly human life is the greatest resource we have. So I think we really need to think of these things and take actions that are effective rather than doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Currently, is there a holistic approach being used in finding solutions? In that, is there consultation between different agencies? is there any room for technical expertise and knowledge of the villagers, the farmers to be used because they know their lived realities best?
Right.
Is there this comprehensive knowledge sharing forum of sorts?
I don't think there is a forum.
Isn't that
such a
common
forum.
sense, though?
It is. So actually, but I would say that the National Action Plan
Okay.
is a very good step forward.
Sure.
But we need to get that into the system.
Shouldn't the National Action Plan come with a budget so that the implementation can be done, so that people aren't just going around with no funds?
Yeah, absolutely. Although the current government has set up a committee to facilitate it, there's no budget to implement the action plan. So that is a drawback.
Yeah.
So, but also, I mean, it's a little bit easier said than done.
Sure.
Because we also need to put in the implementation mechanisms in place.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so with regard to, like I said, the paddy field fences, I see that happening. So I think in the next 5-10 years, human-elephant conflict, everybody wants to solve it yesterday, not going to happen.
Right.
It's a huge problem. It's a very complex problem. It takes time. But I think we are moving in the correct direction. And if we can also get the village fencing program on board, I think then we can see a future where the conflict will go down, elephant deaths, human deaths will go down.
Dr. Prithiviraj, my final question to you, because we're living in a technology-driven community and technology-driven era, doesn't it make sense for us to also utilize the tool of technology for the purpose of mitigating the human-elephant conflict?
Absolutely. So that's why we are advocating community-based electric fences. So electric fences are a technological tool, a solution to this problem. But any tool has to be used correctly.
Right.
Only if you use it correctly will you get the correct results. Currently, the Wildlife Department over the past decades, for various reasons, have put up more than 5,000 kilometers of electric fencing. But the conflict has continued to escalate. The problem is electric fencing is only a tool. Most of these fences are on the protected area boundaries. So they are basically separating the elephants in the protected areas, that is 30% of elephant range, from the elephants in the areas with people, 70% of elephant range.
Right.
So how can that solve the problem? Because you are basically separating the bad elephants and the good elephants. And the bad elephants are the ones that are living with the people and causing problems.
Right.
To call them bad. I'm not saying that they are good or bad. But this is the thing. So I think, yes, you are quite right. Technology can give us a lot of solutions. But we need to use the technology in the correct way. And we also need to understand this is a very widespread problem. It's not a problem that is in one little place where we can put in all our technological expertise and create some very fancy product that will solve the problem. This has to be something that the average farmer, villager in Sri Lanka can use to protect themselves. I think that is the way forward. So yes, technology, yes, very much so, but used correctly and the appropriate technology given the context of the problem.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Prithiviraj Fernando, for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.